אוקיי, בוקר טוב, שבוע טוב, חודש טוב. It's a special day today with all of these hopefully good events concurring together. And we all hope and pray that just as Adar was the month, Adar Bet, Adar Purim is the month in which in the past the Jews were able to turn the picture, to turn the reality, and to control the enemies instead the other way around. Bezrat Hashem, the same way it had been there, it would also be in our days. The shiur today, which is dedicated Leilui Nishmat, as the rest of the series, Leilui Nishmat Rafael Moshe ben Eliyahu. The shiur today, our hero for today, is Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya. You can see here a picture of him. That's a biography of his that was written by one of his great grandsons. And it's very interesting. You know, last week we spoke about Reb Chaim Soloveitchik, and in many senses, that was hitting near home, because both is, you may say that the cultural world he grew in and the spiritual world that he helped to develop and to form is the cultural and the spiritual world that at least I, and I think many of those that sit around this table, are familiar with. But today we speak almost about meaning to say it's almost in contrast. Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya was born in Baghdad in Iraq. Now, some of us were born maybe in Iraq or in Baghdad. But the spiritual world that he inhabits is the world of Kabbalah and of Nistar, what is called in English mysticism. I don't think that the term is so easily translated from language to language. So we would use the word mekubal, which is the Hebrew term. And this is a very different milieu. When we would read, Bezrat Hashem, some of the things that he had written about, and those of you that would want to expand their knowledge, Imir Hashem, I would give you one of his books were actually translated into English for those that want to read. So a very, very different picture of the world, of the role of men in this world. And again, at least for me, this is something that I am less participating or less immersed into the world of Nistar, of Kabbalah. I usually deal and engaged with the world of Nigle, of the less of the hidden Torah and more of the revealed, it may be said, Torah. And so also for me, it was very intriguing and very interesting. I hope that also for you, you'd feel that we are opening some new doors in this shiur. So Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya was born in 1859 in Baghdad, as we said. His father was Rabbi Moshe Fetaya, Rabbi Moshe Yeshua Fetaya, and also his father and his grandfather, they were all great Rabbanim, Mekubalim, all of them very engaged in this wisdom of the Nistar, of the hidden, of the mysteries of the Torah. It is being told by him, it was told that his mother-in-law, meaning his grandmother from his father's side, and his mother didn't have easy relationship. It happens from time to time. So his grandmother she was complaining that the house is not clean enough, and that's the story. The house is not clean enough, and the sofa, I mean, very specific complaints. And his father, it says again, he says that his father, Rabbi Moshe Fetaya, checked the complaints; they were incorrect. So he said to his mother that he sides with his wife, which is again very, very interesting. And so it went for a few years, and the mother-in-law made the life of her daughter-in-law very miserable. Again, no one of us know, obviously, from first hand, but it can sometimes happen. And it was very, very difficult. After a few years, the mother-in-law passed away. So after she passed away, and the daughter-in-law meaning Rabbi Yehuda's mother, she never complained back, she never answered back. They were always, meaning for a long time, the mother-in-law was living in their home, in their house, and she was, Rabbi Yehuda's mother was, as we say, מהנעלבים ואינם עולבים, those that are maybe insulted but never insult back. And so after the mother and in-law died, after she passed away, after Rabbi Yehuda's grandmother passed away, she suddenly appeared in his mother's dream. And the mother, as the story goes, the mother said to her, you chased after me while you were alive. Now that you're in Olam Ha'emet, maybe you'd leave me alone. And the mother-in-law said, no, I didn't come in order to complain again. After I passed away, I came to heaven, and they told me you were tzaddiket and you deserve to go to Gan Eden, but we cannot allow you in as long as your daughter-in-law does not forgive you for the pain you caused her. So I came back to you in your dream to ask for your forgiveness. And his mother obviously forgave. And then, according to the story, the mother-in-law in the dream, she took a diamond out of a pocket and gave to the mother. And that's how the dream ended. And Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya interpreted this dream as to say that that was the neshama of his. Because a few months later, I guess 9 months later, 10 months later, Rabbi Yehuda was born. So that was his neshama that was handed over to his mother for the zchut of never answering back to the mother-in-law. That is a beautiful story by itself. And also, I think it's a good introduction to the word of Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya, which is a word of dreams, of neshamot coming from Olam Ha'emet to speak with human beings, a word in which we may say the boundary between the spiritual world and the physical world, the boundary that I think that for us is usually is a very distinguished one. Obviously, we believe in the spiritual world and we are doing mitzvot and we pray, but we live in this world and we know that there is another world. But for him and for the people around him, we may say, this boundary was much less strong. And there were always things going through this boundary. So things from this physical world would somehow transpire into the spiritual world, and each beings from the spiritual world would appear in the physical world in different ways. So that is the introduction, we may say, to Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya, to this מקובל, חכם Yehuda, as he was called by the people that knew him. Now, he also tells that as a child, he would go with his father, Rabbi Moshe Yeshua Fetaya, he would go with him to hear the drashot of the Ben Ish Chai in Baghdad. And I think we had a shiur about the Ben Ish Chai, and his drashot were famous, that he would speak very strong, and everyone would understand. He spoke for hours and hours, and people were sitting down quietly, not uttering a word. So it was a very, the impression that was left on the child was very strong. And Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya tells that the Ben Ish Chai in his drashot would have both halacha and parshat shavua and nigle, but also, as was in Baghdad, the custom, there was also be a lot of nistar, a lot of kabbalah, a lot of zohar. And the young child was not able to understand. He understood when the Ben Ish Chai spoke about the parshat shavua, but he didn't understand when the drasha, the sermon, moved into the more kabbalistic elements. And he was crying every time that he couldn't understand it. He wanted so much, desired to understand the holy words of the Ben Ish Chai, that he cried. And later he said to one of his students, one of his famous students was Rabbi Suleiman Mutzafi. So he was a very famous rabbi, מקובל in Yerushalayim. Maybe some of you are familiar with the name Arav Ben Zion Mutzafi, who is nowadays is a very renowned מקובל, and the posek, a Rav, a very important one. So he's the son of this Talmid of Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya. So Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya told the father of Ben Zion, Suleiman Ben Zion Mutzafi, who is Suleiman Mutzafi, he told him, because of these tears that I shed over not being able to understand the Kabbalah in the sermon, in the drasha of the Ben Ish Chai, these tears gave me the power to learn later. So again, the desire to learn, the desire to know, it was very, very strong in the life of Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya. Now, he was a very excellent student, obviously, and he learned in the best Talmudei Torah in Baghdad. It was called Batei Midrash, and the most famous of them was Midrash Zilka. We also spoke about Midrash Zilka when we spoke about Chacham Abdallah Somech. So again, I do not expect everyone here to remember all the rabbis that we spoke about, but he was a very important rabbi in Baghdad, and not only in Baghdad, in all of the Ottoman Empire. Rabbi Abdallah Somech was writing shuvot, answers, responsa to all over, from Baghdad, from Iraq, to India, and to other places, very far away places, were sending their questions to Rabbi Abdallah Somech. He was able to recruit large amounts of money, and he established a yeshiva that was called Beit Midrash Zilka, a very famous yeshiva. Almost all of the rabbis, the important rabbis in the Sephardic world of the 19th and 20th century learned in Midrash Zilka and were ordained by either Rabbi Abdallah Somech or his students. So a very important establishment, and Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya goes to there at a very young age. And at the age of 17, Rabbi Abdallah Somech asked him to become the Shliach Tzibur. And he was only 17, and it's a yeshiva, it's a big yeshiva, with very important Talmidei Chachamim. So one of the Talmidei Chachamim there opposed and said, you cannot give someone who hardly has a beard to become a Shliach Tzibur in a place like Midrash Zilka. Rabbi Abdallah Somech said, and if he was a rabbi, an ordained rabbi, you would have given him regardless of his age? So this opposer said, yes, of course, he was a rabbi, but no one is a rabbi in the age of 17. So Rabbi Abdallah Somech stood up, and in this position, with all of the yeshiva standing around waiting for the beginning of the tefillah, put his two hands on the head of Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya and ordained him. And from there on, he had this reshut to be a posek, to give psika. He was a great scholar of Torah Tanigle, even before it delved into what would become the most central aspect of his life, would be the Torah Tanista, would be Kabbalah. But even before that, he was what we call Mila Kriso Beshas Veposkim. What does that mean? The Chazal say that before you learn the highest aspects of the Torah, as we said, again, the word mystical is, I think, is less appropriate. But the Kabbalah aspect of the Torah, first you need to be very well rooted into the revealed aspect of Torah. That is called Mila Kreso Beshas Veposkim. It's like someone, before getting to the dessert, you must first eat your main course. So in the same way, you must first fill your stomach, Mila Kreso, in Shas, in the Gemara, in Poskim, in the Rishonim and the Achronim, the rabbis. So first fill yourself with the Nigle, with the revealed Torah, and only later you can go to the dessert, right? To the other aspects of the Torah, to the Nistar. And Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya already at the age of 17, as we said, is ordained. And at the age of, they say 23, 24, but I am not sure about it. Something in the numbers does not add up. They say you only began to learn Kabbalah at the age of 24. That doesn't add up. It's because in 25 he was already writing books. So it may be, again, he was a genius. So maybe after 1 year he was writing books. It's hard for me to believe. Maybe the right way to see it is that in Kabbalah itself, there are more revealed sides and more hidden sides. There are sefarim in Kabbalah that are, I wouldn't say that they're accessible to everyone. They are not accessible to everyone. But they are easier and they are more for beginners. And there are books of Kabbalah which are extremely difficult and cryptic. So I believe that when they say he began to learn Kabbalah at the age of 24, what they really mean is that he began to go deeper in Kabbalah at the age of 24. That's my understanding. Anyhow, that was in 1882, and he begins to write with his father, Rabbi Moshe Yeshua Fetaya, was also, as I said, a rabbi and a מקובל. He began to write with him a perush on certain Kabbalistic works called the Idrot, the Idra Rabbah and the Idra Zuta. These are parts of the Zohar. We say the Zohar and we think about a sefer, about a book. But in truth, the Zohar is not a single book. It's an ecosystem. Right? It's a whole literature that can be seen as the Zoharic literature. And one of the parts, the sections of this literature of the Zohar are the Idrot, Idra Rabbah and Idra Zuta. So he sat down with his father to write a commentary on the Idra Rabbah and the Idra Zuta. They called the commentary Yain Harekach. Yain Harekach, meaning the perfumed wine. And that remained in manuscript. His father died during the writing, and he decided, because he completed the works by himself and he was still very young, it seemed to him as maybe inappropriate and also maybe he's wrong. So he decided not to print this manuscript, and it remained with him. This manuscript, keep it in your mind, it would reappear in the story later. And he's sitting there in Baghdad, and he became, slowly but surely, he becomes very famous for giving brachot. And there are different stories. How did he begin to give brachot, to give blessings to people? But what is shared with all of them, I will give one version in a second, but what is shared by all of them is that he didn't want to give this blessing, this brachot, but he was forced to that because of some external force. According to one of the stories, there was a certain sheikh, a Muslim sage in Baghdad that became famous in blessing people and helping them to heal and every other thing that you would want from a blessing. And even the Jews began to go to him. So the rabbis were worried that that would also, of course, create they were worried that who knows what this Qadi is doing and what forces of tum'ah, of impurity, he's employing. And aside of that, they were worried that maybe people would see and maybe they would be dragged into Islam, etc. So they said to Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya, you need to establish your own blessing in order for the Jews to come to you and not to go to this Muslim Qadi. And Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya, at the beginning, he didn't want. They said, we would give you, meaning all of the rabbis of, again, I'm telling the story, there are different versions. But that's, I think, the nicest version. So they said, we would come, all the rabbis of Baghdad, and would give you the authority to give bracha, and by us giving you this power, that would enable you to give brachot on the highest level. And he accepted, because of the need, he accepted that, and he received this power of bracha, and from there on, his brachot would be fulfilled, and people would come to him, etc., etc., etc. And he became very known for that. Very, very known. He had a special system that he developed throughout the years of healing, that he would put his hands on the area that was pained and would feel if there is some ghost or something there that is causing the pain, and by uttering the holy names and other ways of Kabbalah, you would make the pain, the ghost go, and by that the pain to go away. By the way, there was a lot of controversy around that, because as I said, he would put his hands on the pained area, and you do that for men, but also for women, because he said that's the way that I am using my abilities. I'm like a doctor, and that's the way that it should be done. Now in Baghdad, because he was acknowledged by all of the Chachamim there, no one gave him trouble for that. But later we'll speak about that. When he made Aliyah in Yerushalayim, the rabbis were not happy with this method, and he continued with it. And because he was so much acknowledged as a great sage, and no one ever complained, then in the end they let it be. But no one of his students adopted this method. Yes? Yeah, I would speak about one of his books called the Minchat Yehuda, in which he has a whole paragraph speaking about it. It says not only the Zohar. It says if you look at the Torah, you would see that every time someone wants to give someone a blessing, what does he do? Put his head on his head. It's never done remotely. It's always done with the heads on the head. So when you want to give a bracha of chokhmah, which is most of the brachot in the Torah, then you put on the head. But when someone has a pain in his feet or in his hand, then you need to put the hand on the organ that is pained. That was his argument. Yes, and not only a bracha. I mean, as I said, it's more complicated than that. He was giving a bracha. He was saying the holy names in order to chase away bad spirits that may be there. As I said, we are speaking about here a word that for some of us may be different than what we are used to. But nonetheless, it's a major part of the Jewish world, and I think a very interesting and intriguing one. ברוך אתה אדוני אלוהינו מלך העולם שהכל נהיה בדברו.
I read someone like this. Somebody on a mission, army, whatever, this is the echo. And somebody came and did something like that to him and killed him. He was not allowed to say how he did it.
So there is a tradition that he was part of, and he also passed along to some of his students. But as I said, it seems that putting the hands, especially when we speak between the genders, that is something that is not to be done these days. So that's important to know that was a specialty for him, but not something that should be done. So he was also became more and more famous, not only as giving brachot, but also in other two areas, both extremely interesting. One is as an interpreter. I guess I butchered this word. Interpreter. Okay, anyhow, explaining dreams. People would come to him with their dreams, and he would explain to them their dreams. And it's extremely interesting because you see, he wrote some of them in some of his books. He has a whole book in which, I would speak about it. That was the book that was translated to English. He has a section about dreams. And sometimes he's using what we would now call a very psychological approach. Sometimes a Freudian approach, sometimes what is more similar to if you know Jung, the Jungian approach, right, with archetypes. Sometimes it would be that from Kabbalah, that you would say a certain spirit was revealed to you and spoke to you. Again, very, very interesting. He gave, in this book that he wrote, he gave hints. How do you know that a certain dream is true or not? If a spirit has revealed itself to you in a dream, and let's say that she said, that the spirit said, I'm Eliyahu Navi. What conditions are you to believe it and what not? By the way, if you're interested in the answer is ask it to translate a pasuk into the vernacular. He spoke in Arabic. So ask him to translate a pasuk into the vernacular, and it should be a pasuk with two conditions. One, it should include the name of Hashem, the Yud Kei Vav Kei. And the second, it should be a pasuk speaking about the destruction of the evil spirits. Now, if it's really Eliyahu Navi, you'd have no problem to translate this pasuk. But if it's a ghost, they cannot translate a pasuk that contains the name of Hashem when it is against them. So he would not be able to translate the pasuk. And he has a very interesting story about a child, a young boy, that came to him and said that he sees Eliyahu Navi in a dream. And when he said to Eliyahu, we said to the boy, ask this Eliyahu Navi to translate a certain pasuk to you. And then when the boy asked Eliyahu Navi to translate the pasuk, Eliyahu says, I must go now. I need to count the merits of Am Yisrael. And never returned. So again, very interesting. Many of the people that came to him with this problem of dreams, or the other area in which he became very, very famous, and that is exertion, the exorcism. Okay, so that is when someone has a bad spirit that came into his body, and now he wants it to be removed. So that is, in Hebrew, it's called dibuk. Dibuk, right. And again, for us, reading his description, he described many of the stories. Many of them happened in shuls with many people that are watching. And this is not something that is done necessarily in a room, in a private room. That's something that many people saw. Very interesting. When we read it, we many times, I think, would read the story and say that this is a man that nowadays would get some type of psychiatric label. Oh, and no, not Rabbi Fetaya, the people that he was, the clients, right? So the client would come and he has some thoughts. He always has thoughts coming into him that he cannot chase away. So nowadays you'd say you have some type of an OCD, right? An obsessive disorder, the compulsion, and that's why you cannot remove the thoughts that you have. Rabbi Fetaya, it's a complete different way of looking at the world. You would say, you have a spirit that came into you, and I need to speak with the spirit in order to see why it has came into you. What does it want? How can I letaken, fix? Either the word fix is not, but how can I fix the spirit so it can go out and return to whatever it should return to? And he wrote and he spoke with many spirits. And some of them he was able to heal, some of them not. He's writing in a very humble way. Sometimes the treatment worked, sometimes it worked only for a limited amount of time. So it worked for an year, that the boy or the girl or the man or the woman or whoever it would be became healed, and then the spirit came back. So that is a treatment. It's not a magic in the sense that you would say some type of a formulation and the disease would go away. But he was trying to diagnose the problem with the way, again, that he saw the world, and to treat it with this way, and he had many successes. Some were failures. And again, he writes, it's extremely interesting. Extremely interesting. He speaks with the spirits. Now, the spirits answer from the body of the man who is inflicted. And he asks them, who are you? Why are you here? What did you see in the world upstairs? And he's being given very interesting answers. Again, it's not him only. It's a whole shul sometimes that he's there. And he writes it down. And as I said, it was published. If you are looking that, I found it yesterday. I went on a search on Amazon. You can find it on Amazon. It's a sefer named Minchat Yehuda, and it was translated. Now I cannot grant you for the exactness of the translation because I didn't see even one word of it. I don't know, but it seems that it seems like a nice work. It's 500 and something pages. Yeah, so it's and he has many stories that also has Pirushim of the Torah, by the way. He has a whole section dedicated to Parshat Miketz. Why? Because he's very interested in the dreams of Yosef, how to interpret the dreams, right? So it's a very interesting sefer. Again, very different from maybe what we are doing here usually, but an eye-opener into a world that usually maybe we are not so much open to. In 1905, he's making his first attempt of Aliyah, and he's going to Yerushalayim. He lives there for 10 months, and then he becomes extremely sick, and he has to go back to Baghdad. The air of Yerushalayim is bad for him, it's bad for his health, and he cannot understand why is it. And later he said that he is a Gilgul of Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda is the name of an Amora from the, I guess, 3rd century in Bavel, or 4th. And Rav Yehuda was of the opinion that one is not allowed to make Aliyah until Mashiach comes. So Rav Yehuda even had a student, a Talmid named Rabbi Zera, that wanted to make Aliyah, and he had to hide himself from his rabbi because Rav Yehuda didn't allow him to make Aliyah. He said, you are not allowed to make Aliyah until the time of the Geulah. And Rav Yehuda, Ptaya, our Rav Yehuda, our hero, he said, I seem to be a Gilgul, a reincarnation of this ancient Rav Yehuda, and that's why, because he gave this psika that you are not allowed to make Aliyah, that's why I find it so difficult to make Aliyah. He had to try for 3 times, as we would explain, we would describe later, Be'ezrat Hashem, before he was able, only after 3 times, he was able to make Aliyah permanently and to stay in Yerushalayim, and by that to fix the need of this ancient Rav Yehuda to go to Eretz Israel. So again, very interesting, the way that he saw, as you saw, everything is interconnected. That's what I say in our world. Again, I'm saying our, and I apologize for those of you that does not identify what I'm saying now. But in the world I am coming from, things are much more in boxes, right? So if I am Baruch Weintraub, that's who I am. And, maybe there are Gilgul, maybe there are other things, but I'm not living them. They are not part of the world that I am aware of. So they may be, again, spiritual things and secrets, but I am living my life according to what I see. But that's not the way that he lived his life. And his world, there were no such neat boxes of this Gilgul and maybe the early. Everything is a mixture. And we are living the life of our ancients, and we are contributing towards the life of the future generations, and everything is much more fluid. Again, it's very, for me at least, I find it very interesting, very intriguing, and a very different sort of way to live. Anyhow, as I said, in 1905, in his first attempt to make Aliyah, he comes to Jerusalem, and on the first day that he's in Jerusalem, a knock on the door. And in the door appears Rav Avram Ades, one of the grandchild of Rav Avram Ades. You may know the name is Rabbi Yaakov Ades. He is a very known today. He's also a great Mekubal, lives in Jerusalem. He's a very unique person who would maybe someday would speak about. But his grandfather, Rabbi Avram Ades, was also a Mekubal in Jerusalem. He knocks on the door, and Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya opens the door, and Rabbi Avram Ades said, "I am coming to you in a mission." Mission, whatever, I just came to Jerusalem. You must publish your Perush on the Idrot. Says Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya, there are only three know about my Perush on the Idrot. It's me, it's my father, and it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do you know about this manuscript that I wrote and I decided not to publish? So Rabbi Avram Ades says, there was a certain zaken that appeared to me in the dream yesterday night and told me that Ari Alami Bavel, a lion, has now came to Eretz Israel from Bavel, and he has a manuscript, and he must publish the manuscript for the sake of the whole world. That's the story. And Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya asked him, describe to me this old man that appears to you in the dream, and he gives him the description. And Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya says, that's Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai himself. And Rabbi Avram Ades says, if you know that, then you also saw him. And they shake hands, and in the end, they do or whatever they do in these circles, and they decided they would publish the Sefer. However, in the end, it took him another almost 16 years to publish the Sefer, and maybe because of monetary problems. And he says that the reason why he had two sons, one of them he lost, he says that it is because he was delayed in obeying to the order of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. And it's also part of the story, because Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai said that your right eye would lit up when you would publish the Sefer. And when he didn't publish the Sefer on time, and his son, Lo Aleinu, died, then he said, that is my right eye that went dim. That's the way that, again, he interpreted, he explained the dream. As I said, he returned to Bavel. He's not able to remain in Jerusalem. And as you may know, in 1914, there is an event that shakes the whole world, and that is the First World War. And it comes to Iraq, it comes to Bavel. The Ottoman Empire is on the side of, I don't know, the English word, Matzamot Atzir. How did they call it? Not Atzir. There was the Matzamot Haskama. Yes, the central part. But in First World War, it was called Central also? The German. Yes, so they were called the Central. Thank you. Okay, and there was the Haskama, right? The agreement. I don't know what are the English terms. Yeah. No, but these are the names from the Second World War. It's the same names? Okay. I apologize. I should have checked it earlier. What was the name? The Entente. Okay. So the Ottoman Empire was fighting with the side of the Russian, which obviously during the war fell away because of the revolution, and the Germans against the British and the French, etc. And in the course of the war, things became very, very difficult for the Jews in Iraq. And let's read from his own description what happened there. It's the first source. הנה בעירינו בגדד. So in our city, בגדד. היו לנו שניים כרובים, זהב, הסוככים על העיר מבית ומחוץ. Two cherubs, like two angels, that were defending the city. הם היו לנו לחומה ולמחסה ביום זעם. They were like the walls and the shelter in days of anger. One was Rabbi Yosef Chaim, this is the Ben Ish Chai, and the other is the Chacham Rabbi Shimon Aaron המכונה Agassi. He is less known today, but Rabbi Shimon Agassi was a very famous מקובל of his day. המחבר ספר בני אהרון על שאר הגלגולים. אשר שני צדיקים אלו הם לבדם היו נמצאים בעירינו, שרוב עסקם היה בעץ חיים ובשמונה שערים. So these two great מקובלים would sit, and almost the whole day they would learn Kabbalah. עץ חיים is the ספר of the Ari, excuse me, the ספר of the Chaim Vital, but it is from the teachings of the Arizal. And that is a so important books in the eyes of Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya, that the most famous book that Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya would write is called Beit Lechem Yehuda. That would be, he called it a Rashi-style interpretation of the Etz Chaim. Meaning, he tried to make this Etz Chaim as accessible as possible to, again, not saying everyone, because that would be way overboard, but to as many as possible that would be able to learn. And he says, because they were learning the Etz Chaim, המה בזכותם וצדיקותם היו מגנים על העיר. זה מפה וזה מפה. So both of them were defending the city, each one of them sat in his own corner and learned the Etz Chaim. Okay? Oh. Yeah. Okay. I wonder what he would have said. You know, it's so there are so many stories in which they say that, for example, there was once that the jar of fruits remained. Oh. Okay, I apologize for all of that. So I just telling a story that is related. So there was a jar of a bowl of fruits on the table, and everyone took one fruit. I mean, the students, and one fruit just remained there because it looked a little, you know, it was not so nice anymore. And Rabbi Fetaya say we must also eat this fruit. So asked why. He said, you know why this fruit remained for the end? In every fruit that we can eat, he says, that there is a neshama of someone that had to go back to this world because, I mean, if you are a righteous person, then you don't have to go back to this world in order to become a fruit. But if you made certain avirot, then you have to return to this world as a fruit. And by helping someone, let's say he's eating you, and then he's performing mitzvot, then that is a fix, that is a tikkun to this neshama. And sometimes the neshama must wait for a certain minute before it can be fixed. And that's why this fruit waited, and it doesn't look so nice now. But if you just throw it away, you are wasting the opportunity of this neshama to be fixed. So when you see a last fruit that was not taken, he says you should always take it and eat it. Not because it will be so tasty for you, but because it's a fix to the neshama that is inside this fruit. So again, just understand the world that he's inhabiting, right? There is a Gemara saying that if we would have been able to see all the demons and all the angels running around, we would go out of our mind. That's what the Gemara says. So I guess he was seeing more than the usual person is able to see. But when you live like that, it's also, I think, it gives certain meaning to every. I mean, I would say, do not throw the fruit because it's a baltashrit, right? It's a Kadosh Baruch Hu gave you something, you should appreciate it. But when he says it's not only Kadosh Baruch Hu gave you something you should appreciate, there is a neshama in this fruit that is waiting to its tikkun, That is a whole different view. Now, again, I'm not maybe in the level, in the madrega, to live this way like that. I would have to go in the end for someone of his, in order to get treatment. But at least to know that there is such a level, I think that can inspire us as well. That can inspire us as well. So returning to him, so he says, Rabbi Yosef Chaim was niftar in תרס"ט, that is 1909. והתחילה העיר להיות סולה. The city began to limp, right? Because up till now they have these two legs, Rabbi Yosef Chaim and Rabbi Shimon Agassi. But now one leg was taken, so the city began to limp. והתחילו הצרות לבוא. כי אחרי קבורתו נלקחו בחורי ישראל לעבודת הצבא למלך ישמעאל. סליחה? ללמדם סדר המלחמה. So they began to recruit the Jewish boys for the Ottoman army. והיו כל העם מייללים ובוכים. Everyone began to cry. והיינו מתנחמים בחכם רבי שמעון אהרון זצ"ל. וכל העם ענו אחריו, עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו. Interesting choice of word, right? עוד לא עבדה תקוותנו. כי הוא יכול למלא מקום הרב חכם רבי יוסף חיים. So then the second rabbi, the second great rabbi that was there, they hoped he would fulfill the position, so he would defend the city. אך לא כאשר דמינו כן היה. But what we hoped did not happen. Why? מעשה שטן הצליח. וגם באותו צדיק פגע מידת הדין. This צדיק, the second צדיק, רבי שמעון אגסי, also was harmed by מידת הדין, כי אחרי 5 שנים, בליל ו' ח' לחודש מנחם, שנת המבית לארץ תרעד, תרעד is 1914, and תרע"ד, but it is also, תרעד means to shake. The land is shaking. נסע גם הוא למנוחות ועזב אותנו להנחות, והסתלק גם חכם רבי שמעון ז"ל, אז קבע מהעיר גם שביב האחרון. Then the last light was taken out from Baghdad. Now, Baghdad was full of rabbis and chachamim, but no one was of the stature of the Ben Ish Chai and Rabbi Shimon Agassi, and their depth in Kabbalah. And it says that's what was defending the city, and now that they are gone, the walls of the city are gone. והייתה עצרה, יוסף איננו ושמעון איננו, right? That is a paraphrasing on Yaakov Avinu. So Yosef is gone and Shimon is gone. And then it was a time of trouble to Yaakov, and I skip a little, נדבקו מודעות אדומים מטעם המלך וגדוליו בכל השווקים ובכל המקומות, ובתוך המודעות מצויר חרב אדום. So he says, then there was a few days after the ptira, the passing away of Rabbi Shimon Agassi, there was the declaration of war between the Ottoman Empire and Britain. And the way that they declared it, the way they published to the people, there was no radio to most of the people in the Ottoman Empire. So how would you publish that we are in a war? They put modaot, right? Signs, signs on the walls, pashkevilim, saying that we are now in a state of war. ובתוך המודעות, he says, in this post, there were drawings. Some people doesn't know how to read. So there was a drawing of swords. לאות מלחמה, ממלכה בממלכה, ממלכת קונסטנטינה, קונסטנטינה is Turkey, with ממלכת בריטניה. ותכף התחילו לקבץ את בחורי ישראל, and they took the Jews. I mean, it was not so care, to be honest. If the Goyim would make war against the Goyim, that was, part of the furniture for centuries, that there is a war between the Goyim. But that they take now the Jews, that was a new thing. That they take the Jews in order to fight. And as you all know, I think, in First World War, there were Jews fighting in all sides. And Jews killing Jews. And there are many stories about a certain, let's say, a British soldier that is storming into the shuchot, trenches, thank you, the trenches of, let's say, the German side, and he would be able to kill one of the German soldiers. Then the German soldier would say, Shema Israel. And only then the British soldier would understand that he killed one of his kin. And that was part of the disaster of this war. And he says they began to recruit the Jews, and the troubles began to become, אין שעה בלא רעה, there was no hour without something bad happening. And then, if that was not enough, the year later, in Yud Gimel Kislev, there was rain, very strong rain, very heavy rain, and the Euphrates was flooding the whole city of Baghdad. ופרצו גדרי הנהר ושטפו ועברו תוך העיר בעוד היותנו ישנים על מיטותינו בלילה. We were sleeping on our beds, we were not even prepared, we were not ready, and the river was flooding the whole city, ותהי צעקה גדולה בתוך העיר. People were crying out, אשר כמוה לא נהייתה. There was never such a voice. If you remember, he's rephrasing here, מכת בכורות, just to see what is the context that he's thinking in. And the people of the city were running away with their children, בניהם ובנותיהם הקטנים, their youngest. They are taking them on their shoulders. והיו בורחים ונסים בתוך העיר, inside the city. It's like a tsunami. And they are running from the lowest places to the highest places. כי אין דרך לצאת מן העיר, כי המים הקיפו כל העיר מכל צד. So you cannot run away. The water are all around the city. The only thing you can do is go to the highest levels of the city. That is extremely frightening. I don't know even how to describe that. And he says the water had flooded third of the city, and some people that were not able to run away, their houses became their tombstones, their graves. And then came Dever, came the disease. Why? And that happens many times, because they are not able to bury the people and there is no hygienic conditions. And then disease began to strike. And נתמלא אוויר הקרקע also, הרקיע פרעושים, and also flies were everywhere. Again, the hygienics were terrible. ונלווה עמהם מכת בצורת. And then there was no rain. After these heavy rains, there were no rains. So no food. ויוקר השערים, and inflation. Everything became very, very, very expensive. We were not able to buy. That is because of the war, I guess. גם אנשי הצבא לא הצליחו במלחמה. Now you have to remember, the Ottoman Empire was not doing great in the First World War. Truth is that made so poorly that the whole empire collapsed, as we all know. And the modern Turkey was rising out of the ashes. But the Ottoman Empire was gone after the First World War. So many people were killed, and also Jews. And the wives remain almanot. They remain widows, and the children became orphans. Just think about the year that they were going through. And he says all of that because we didn't have rabbis anymore that would defend us. That's the way that he sees that. עד שראה השם את לחץ עמו ישראל וינחם על הרעה, ונלכדה בבל בליל א' י"ז אדר שנת עזרת, ביצגן המלחמה של בריטניה הנקרא מורד. So I don't know who is this general that he's speaking about. Says there was a certain English general called Maud, I don't know. He conquered Iraq. So as we know, England conquered Iraq from the Ottoman Empire in the First World War, as it conquered the whole of the Middle East. Not all, France also took some, but mostly it was by the English. And they conquered Bavel. And says that was a salvation for us from the Ottoman Empire. And they, when the Turkish left the city, when the Ottoman left the city, they wanted to burn everything down, like the Russian, right? That the English would not be able to advance. So they wanted to burn everything to the ground. And the English, when they entered the city, they were able to save it. They were able to put out the fire, and to save the city. And he says the Turkish thought that they would take everyone, that they tried to plight, and this is a war. And things went terrible for the Jews until, as I said, the British came in. And then he says, Baruch Hashem, we were saved by they saw the British as the liberators and not as conquerors. He says we were able to be saved, and my two children were saved, Ovadia and Shimon Zal. We know that Shimon, as I said, died later. He didn't die in this event. He died later because, that's the way that Rabbi Yehuda saw it, because of his delay in printing his book. And he says the whole reason why did it happen is because there were not enough Rabbanim learning Kabbalah. That's how he interpreted the whole thing. He says we were safe as long as we had the Ben Ish Chai and Rabbi Shimon Agassi learning Kabbalah. When they disappeared, our defense disappeared. So what is the conclusion? We need to expand the learning of Kabbalah. And he says, again, someone came to him with a dream and told him that he needs to begin to teach Kabbalah to the masses. And he also understood that that's the only remedy to the situation that they found himself in. And that's how he began to write the Sefer, the Sefer that made him famous, as I said, which is the Beit Lechem Yehuda, this Rashi interpretation, this explanation in, again, I would not say in easy language, but as easy as it can be in relation to the type of the subject that we are speaking here about, and in order to make the Chaim, the special work of Kabbalah, accessible to everyone who is capable of reading his Perush. So First World War had come and passed by. Now the British are ruling the Ottoman Empire. Much easier for the Jews because the British, at least in theory, they give equal rights to the Jews. So that's a very big difference from the Ottoman Empire. And they are able to reestablish Beit Zilka, this big yeshiva of his, and he's becoming the Rosh Yeshiva, and he opens a special maslul, right? A special track for learning Kabbalah in Beit Zilka. So it's not something that you are doing in the extra hours anymore. It is something that is the main, not for everyone, but for anyone that wants, he can enter. And by the way, he said, you are not allowed to reject anyone from learning Kabbalah because the material would do the work. If someone is not capable and he is not worthy of learning it, he would go out by himself. Again, that's an interesting approach. It is not the classic approach in Yahadut, but that was his approach, and he taught Kabbalah in his yeshiva. In 1923, again tries to make Aliyah, and now it's much easier, again, because the British are now in control of both Iraq and Eretz Israel. So he's trying to make Aliyah, but again, after 10 months, he's very, very sick and has to return to Bavel because the air is not good for him. Only in 1933, he would be able to make Aliyah permanently and to settle in Eretz Israel. That is also when he prints his Perush. Now, his Perush is beyond my abilities. I only read the introduction. In the introduction, he has a very interesting thing. He says there, you know what, I wrote this commentary, but you should first read the words of the Chaim, the word of the book itself. If you understand them in an intuitive way, do not read my Perush, because everyone has his own understanding in Torah. And you should not force upon yourself my understanding of Torah. Only if you cannot understand by yourself, only then you should read my Perush, or after you read a few chapters and you are settled in your ways, you can read my Perush in order to make compressions. That's the way that he writes it down. Again, very, very interesting, very open to this type of subject matter, such as Kabbalah, that we usually see it as a very closed subject matter in which you are not allowed to think by yourself, but you should accept. That is what Kabbalah. You should accept, you should receive the tradition and not try to understand by yourself. But again, he had a very different approach. His Sefer, his commentary on the Chaim became very, very known, known by those that know. But in the world of Kabbalah, it is very famous, and he became very well known in Yerushalayim. Again, he continued with all of the dibukim and the chalomot, the dreams, and the brachot. Everything obviously was continuing in Yerushalayim. In 1937, he becomes very, very sick, and he's being hospitalized in Shari Tzedek. And he says that one of the doctors there tried to poison him because he was too old. And he said, because I was old, some of the doctors think that if someone is too old, then they need to get rid of him. That's what he says. And I have to admit, I don't know what happened with him and what these doctors do. It is not something that is completely, I'm not saying anything about any doctor that we know, but I know about certain cases because, sometimes cases come to me because of old age and the question of what a care should be given and what not. There are these type of doctors or nurses that would very actively assist someone to go from this world to the next. And let's be suffice with that. So he says that the doctor tried to poison him, and he took one dose, understood that that is where he's heading, and decided not to take the second dose. But he was extremely, extremely sick. The story goes that Rabbi Suleiman Mutzafi, his student that we spoke about earlier, went to Kever Rachel and gave 5 years of his life for his master. And that's what happened. He lived for another 5 years and 6 months. I'm not sure where the 6 months are going, but that's what they say in the book. Another 5 years and 6 months, which bring us to 1942, which means, and that is the story of which we would end, that he lived here while the Germans were closing by to El Ulmain, in Egypt. And as you know, everyone here in Israel was extremely worried, is I think a gross understatement. So people were hysterical, and for very good reasons. And obviously everyone was praying. Even people that did not pray up till now were praying. And people like Rabbi Fetaya, he was going all over in Me'arat HaMachpelah and in Kever Rachel, everywhere that he could to make tikkunim. Now, he wrote a book called Machberet Asirei HaTikva about the type of tefillot you need to do. Very complicated. You have to take 12 people against the 12 Shvatim and the woman against Dinah. And he has a whole arichut, a whole story about how you should do this tefillot and what you should say. The notebook is still here, and I know that it was used from time to time in Milchemet Yom Kippur. There were great rabbis that used his formulation of tefillot. There is a story which is brought here in the Sefer. I would finish with it. I cannot say if it's true or not. But that's how the story goes. The story goes that they asked from a British pilot from the army and to take him, Rabbi Fetaya, and another few mekubalim, and they brought into the plane cages full of chickens. And he took them in a route through the borders of Eretz, not these days, Medinat Israel, but Eretz Israel, the mandatory Eretz Israel, so that included almost to Egypt. And they were doing kaparot and shachtening the chickens and throwing their blood through the plane in order to create like a circle of defense around Eretz Israel. Now, the story is a story. There is a certain British pilot that in the 70s gave an interview in which he said that he was the pilot of the plane. Now, is it correct or not? Rabbi Fetaya himself never spoke about it. But according to the story, the line of blood was more or less where the Germans were stopped. Now, again, I'm giving you the story as it is being told, without any claim that I know is correctness or not. But as we said here many times, they don't tell these types of stories about me, right? So even if the story is incorrect, it does say a lot about how people saw the greatness of Rabbi Yehuda Fetaya. As I said, if someone is interested to read more about his intercourses with the spirits that he spoke with, and about the dreams that he was interpreting, and about his approach to the commentary of the Torah, the Sefer Minchat Yehuda can be either just downloaded in Hebrew from the internet, or can be bought on Amazon in English. It was translated, and you can read furthermore into this extremely interesting life in Torah. Minchas Yehuda. I would send. I would send the link, Be'ezrat Hashem. Again, I do not guarantee you to the exactness of the translation. I just saw it yesterday night. I thought it's extremely interesting to mention it if someone wants to expand his knowledge. So thank you very much.